Hello Internet, I'm Jackie Fox, and I want to make a quicker video to get some thoughts out of my head that I had wanted to make recently in this year, but just couldn't find time to in between other things that I had to do, and frankly, recently being injured several times. And the first one of the thoughts that I want to get out of my head, and the reason that I'm just not going to make this video, is that it's basically two videos in one that are inextricably linked, and each probably take about 20 minutes to tell. So instead, I'm going to give you the very condensed version of that, which is to say that a couple weeks ago, I found out how dangerous it is to dance in America. I know, that's really dystopian, isn't it? Because I was dancing in my living room to electro swing. I think I was dancing to Caravan Palace, and I felt something go wrong in my ankle. And at the time that this happened, I was not covered by health insurance, and it's I don't want to say that I am recovered. It's been a couple of weeks, and it seems to be a ligament injury, if not something more. But I can kind of walk now. And so that brings in the first part of the video, which is the indictment of our healthcare system, that it's, for so many people, it can be a crippling, either financially or physically, thing to just joyously dance in one's living room, and how dystopian that is. But at the same time, also that kind of talking about the ACA and the failed promises that it makes, in that it's essentially adapted Romney care, and also the problem that, you know, the health plans, while they may be more affordable than what we had previously, and while they may have expanded coverage to millions of Americans that previously did not have health insurance, they've also been a giant money pump into an industry that need not exist, and their prices, even on their lowest levels, still exclude many people. And without expansions to Medicaid, those people are completely fucked, and those are the people who need this the most. And in a lot of states, there was a resolution, a part of the ACA, to give them funding. All they had to do was approve it, to expand their Medicaid programs in order to fit everyone who couldn't reasonably, with their income, afford even the basic marketplace program. And a lot of states just decided not to take the money. A lot of states that have local governments that are deeply red. North Carolina, which is mainly kind of a purple state in terms of like presidential elections and some of the bigger things, like who we send to federal office, who we send to our state offices is still predominantly Republican. And the reason for this doesn't have anything to do with anything more really than gerrymandering. This should be a purple state through and through, but at least our districts are set up so that the Republicans have a pretty significant advantage. And states like mine, you know, you can fall into this gap really easily, where you have no acceptable health insurance options. And you need insurance to be able to get care for a serious injury that you can't deal with yourself through first aid. And it's a shame that we're paying a middleman way more than we should be, way more than we would be with, say, a Medicare for All program, where the government is just paying for these things directly instead of paying for a middleman to pay for them directly. But I also wanted to share the news that in the kind of process of writing that video and recovering, I found out that there was an expansion under, I believe, the IRA, that was giving up to like $1,000 a month in various places. It's a little bit dependent on where you are in the country. I thought I would be excluded because, again, we didn't take the money for the Medicaid expansion. So I figured if it was location-based, our state had done something to exclude me, as they often cruelly do. But no, they hadn't. So actually, I have a marketplace program now. It's the bronze level, the shit tier, and the government is paying over $400 a month for it. And even with that, it is very far from free healthcare, because, you know, honestly, it does expand my options in terms of places I can go a lot more. And there is a lot of access to specialists that I wouldn't have. And, you know, maybe I'm going to be needing an ankle specialist soon, so that is helpful. But at the same time, I still have to pay like $50 a visit. And previously being uninsured, if I really had to find healthcare, there at least very simple stuff or kind of diagnostic stuff, doc, write me a prescription for something. I could get that for $50 if I went to a very specific place, jumped through a couple of hoops, signed some papers and stuff. It was possible to do that without insurance at kind of the same price. Now, this does expand that quite a bit, but it's just, having to use that often if I had a more chronic illness and had to see the doctor repeatedly, that could be backbreaking to the point where it could be functionally kind of difficult to use for a lot of people and a lot of income groups, especially in states that, again, are lacking in the Medicare expansions that would be very helpful for them at that level. But I think through this program, we have actually reached a kind of theoretical point where if you consider this free healthcare, which it isn't, but if you do, then everyone, I think, in the country actually, regardless of what their state legislatures have done to them since the ACA, do have a way that they can access health insurance. And that, seeing an actual doctor about a injury as specific as this and as significant as this is probably your best way to go. So if you have to do that, again, I hate the way that it's being done, but if you need access to this, get it. And now's the time to get it. But also, I wanted to make a guide on all the things that I found to do as I'm waiting for my insurance to kick in next month, so that I can see a specialist. And, that breaks down into essentially RICE, which is rest, ice, compression, and elevation, all for various reasons. And these are really good for like a lot of foot, leg, and limb injuries. Like it's what you might do if you break a bone or break a toe or, have something like that happen. Because for one, rest is very important for the healing process. I mean, when you work out, for example, you stress muscles to the point where parts of them tear. Not like in a painful way, but like in a way that all movement, all use of your body causes small amounts of damage that your body can easily repair each day. So if you're resting, if you aren't causing any of that structural damage that your body, again, is daily repairing on those low levels, then it can focus in on healing one part of you. And for an ankle injury, you especially want to keep weight off of it for a very long time. And even when you kind of feel like you can walk, you definitely want to test that very carefully and very slowly. You should probably go ahead and order or get a friend to bring you crutches, or have a friend like help you with meals and stuff, because the amount of things that you can probably drag into your bedroom to make meals by yourself, as I experimented with. And by the way, you can take frozen shrimp, put them in rice in a rice cooker, and it will brown the bottom a little bit more because the physics of how rice cookers work don't really allow for you to cook much more than just rice in them, unless you have like fancier Instapots. But I'm talking about like the basic rice cooker. But you can actually cook shrimp in the rice pretty well. That was a really easy. I can barely get out of bed, but I can make this meal by bringing a rice cooker into my bedroom. But if you can have a friend help you out, that was another big part of this video. Like with this sort of an injury, the rest is going to be enabled by you having someone help you with a lot of these things, because otherwise there's a lot of things you have to do, and it's going to be very difficult to do those things safely unless you happen to have crutches like already in your home for some reason. Ice is good for helping reduce swelling. Also, it can kind of desensitize painful areas for a little bit. It can kind of numb you a bit in a very small way that can be helpful for getting through the first couple days of an injury like this. But it is worth noting, especially if it's not a muscular injury, if it's something like a tendon or a ligament where you're talking about connective tissue, it can be even more helpful to, in addition to ice, also cycle in some heat and do like heating cooling cycles. The cooling cycles that are recommended that I saw would be for like 20 to 30 minutes every couple of hours. And then I would imagine you would work in kind of heat in a similar amount of time on that same time frame, kind of do them back to back. So that's 1 hour of heating and cooling collectively, like 30 minutes of each every couple of hours for that first couple of days. But heating actually can be really helpful, especially for those non-muscular injuries, because they have less access to capillary action, which is going to bring them nutrients and help them heal faster in the way that your muscles can heal regularly every day. If you exercise every day, even you're putting a lot of stress on those muscles to recover every day. And likewise, that in some ways, a lot of the nutritional needs can be similar, but a little bit more specific to kind of what you would need during a weightlifting cycle as well. The next is compression. ACE compression bandages are probably the best way to do this. It's a kind of weird reusable elastic wrap that I think they have Velcro closures by now. I always remember like the little spiky, like giant weird staple kind of things that you would clasp them with back in the day. I actually don't have a modern compression bandage. I had to kind of jank something together based on stuff I had in the house. But compression is really helpful, again, for reducing swelling, kind of redirecting fluids that might settle in that part of the body. Elevation also helps keep fluids from settling and increasing swelling in some cases, kind of fluid retention-wise. So compression can be really helpful, but this also creates kind of a protective structure that can be aided with additionally an ankle brace if you have one. If you don't, it would be really helpful during the early healing, like when you're testing being able to walk again, and when you're walking on it, when you feel confident that you can walk on it, you should probably still wear the brace for a little while, just in case you take a step wrong and you find out that you weren't quite as healed as you thought you were. Because those types of missteps can really reverse a lot of healing in such a sensitive and weight-bearing place as the ankle. And then finally, elevation. The easiest way to do a lot of elevation per day, and the goal here is essentially to put your ankle above your beating heart. So it's having to pump blood to it uphill, which again is going to reduce the amount of swelling that could possibly happen there and kind of reduce some of the inflammation and maybe soreness and pain that you would be experiencing through it, and also kind of making kind of a more conducive environment for your ankle to heal. Although it is worth keeping in mind that a lot of this has talked about swelling as if it's, something that you want to completely, deal with. You want to deal with inflammation, and you might be thinking that you should take anti-inflammatories, and those are a good way to reduce pain during this process, but it might be better to take pain relievers directly instead of anti-inflammatories, at least because a certain amount of inflammation is protective in a physical way of the injuries, and it helps, it just helps keep them safe. It kind of pads them in a way. It's like your emergency padding. So too much inflammation can become very painful and can make things very difficult for you. So there is a place for anti-inflammatories, but it's not something that you should overuse, because you could actually end up making your injury more sensitive to re-injury in the interim, and also you less able to feel that injury until it happens, which is too late and kind of a problem. And then, from that, I wanted to talk a little bit about ankle anatomy, which takes a bit to get into, but talking about ligaments and tendons and muscles and bones and kind of the differences between. And, even though I was reading from good sources here, this is the part where I think I could most Dunning-Kruger myself, and it's probably just best that this part doesn't happen. But it is interesting, especially if you have an ankle injury, a lot of time laying in bed to read about it. What the anatomy of the ankle is. And the one thing, the really big takeaway from that ends up working into nutrition. Because if you understand that you have a ligament or a tendon injury, and if it's just kind of like something relatively minor and you just need to rest it and let it heal, what is the best way to go about that nutritionally? And generally speaking, when if you're talking about muscles, if you're talking about like weightlifting and just that kind of muscular soreness that comes from exercise, then you want kind of a complete protein. You want something that can that contains all of the essential amino acids that the body needs. And therefore, weightlifters tend to be pretty picky about which protein sources they favor, generally going more towards red meat for the inclusion of creatine, which isn't an amino acid but does help with muscle growth and kind of muscular energy. And then you have like milk and egg being really good complete sources as well. And then soy, I think, is complete, but it's kind of deficient in certain ones. In a lot of ways, it is technically complete, but it's not a good amount of each. And then what you should be using for tendons and for ligament injuries is actually collagen protein, which has a very specific profile of amino acids. But that also means that you're essentially concentrating the effort or the effect of the protein by getting collagen protein specifically. And this is actually something you can buy as an isolate, just like other things. And a lot of times I think it's a little bit cheaper, perhaps. It probably depends on the source, because a lot of people think of it a little bit more, and one of its more practical uses would probably be in like skin health and beauty and that type of thing. Instead of like, even though they've kind of gotten around this with peptides, rubbing collagen proteins on your skin doesn't actually help, because your skin can't absorb the collagen proteins. But you actually can get some benefit for your skin by eating collagen as a good part of your diet. And there are a bunch of ways to naturally get this, like bone broths and things that have taken a lot of connective tissue and kind of rendered them down into, the medium like a bone broth would, kind of how that ends up being a little bit thicker, and it's got gelatin and all that stuff in there. But again, I would actually recommend just ordering, kind of shopping around and ordering kind of a jar of concentrate, the same way that you would like a whey protein if you were weightlifting. Because those are exactly, and in high concentration, the amino acids that your body specifically needs to recover this type of injury, which is going to work a little bit different than a muscular injury or soreness would. So it is good to have kind of specialized nutrition to be able to, supplement that, in the same way that you would probably want to have a protein shake after you leave the gym. Except that you're going to want to do this daily instead of, after your workout, and just kind of regularly. And I would probably recommend that a good supplement would probably be maybe 30 grams of collagen protein per day during the healing process, to kind of maximize your body's resources and ability to heal. But in addition to that, you also want to take omega-3 fatty acids, vitamin C, and zinc as well, probably on a daily basis, in order to give your body some of the non-protein, non-amino acid building blocks that it needs to make collagen as well. So that kind of gives you a complete nutritional profile of like what that tissue is made of. So at least in theory, if you eat that stuff in proper amounts through bodily alchemy, it will be transmuted into at least a somewhat functional tendon or ligament repair. Another thing that is worth noting is that, especially with these connective tissue injuries, because of the decreased amount of blood capillaries and blood circulation that can move to these areas, there are a number of things that you can do to help increase circulation other than just using heat. And these are things that you might want to do after kind of the initial swelling and stuff goes down, after the first couple days, after you're done icing it. You might be able to do less elevation, maybe just do elevation at night, or kind of not have to keep it up as high, but kind of keep it isolated. Another part of the reason that you want to elevate that I didn't mention earlier is that you want to give support for the muscles in your leg that would otherwise have to hold your foot like tentatively above the ground so that you don't step wrong and hurt yourself. So putting your foot up or kind of taking those muscles out of the equation can be helpful. And that can remain helpful, but you don't want to keep it up as high necessarily, because what I said earlier about, fluids and blood having to work uphill, that actually in those specific cases of like connective tissue injuries, that starts to work against you as well. So once it becomes bearable to do less elevation, it might be a little bit helpful for your circulation, but that might be a little bit contested. What I can tell you is definitely going to be beneficial is stuff like massage, because massage is going to increase circulation. So you can start even pretty high up on your leg. You could start on your quads, or you could especially like massage your calf, massage kind of around your shins, maybe even massage your foot as well, because all of these things are going to encourage circulation to those areas. You don't necessarily have to massage your ankle. That's probably going to be painful. So even massaging those surrounding areas can help increase blood circulation in a way that can actually help you cut down your healing time a little bit. And to that note, and also just because taking a lot of time off of your foot will also kind of, I think part of this is like psychosomatic. You get used to not walking on it. You get used to favoring it. You get used to taking care with it in the way that you step, and that becomes kind of a mental barrier to walking correctly again. And in a lot of ways, that's helpful because, again, one misstep and you have backslid quite a bit. But at the same time, there's also a certain level of, I don't want to say necessarily atrophy, especially for younger folks, but staying, not putting the daily weight on it for a long time can cause those muscles to kind of weaken, or at least become a little bit more inactive or sedentary. So it can be helpful to do like flexibility tests and kind of some physical therapy things. There's a lot of things you can do in bed on your back just by kind of trying to pull your knee up, or things to flex your leg, or you can just flex your muscles. Like you can progressively flex from your butt down into your quads and then flex your calves and kind of like create tension and then release it, and then create tension and then release it, flex and release. And that's going to help to drive blood down your leg to the injury as well. So that's kind of another level that you can think about treating this on. In most things that are going to help you get circulation to those things are going to help. But again, this is kind of going a little bit overboard for things like muscular injuries, although you still have a lot of the same problems in terms of your leg, kind of your muscles being out of action for a little bit, that, some warming up could definitely help with during the healing process so that they're not kind of completely out of the game. You don't want to do anything crazy. You don't want to do anything like weight bearing, but, laying on your back, there's a number of exercises that you could do. And the thing about all that is, while I do think that it's kind of important and cool to get all of that information to people, that kind of practical first aid, what if this happens to me? What do I do before I go to the doctor, or while if I can't get an appointment for a couple of days, or if I can't get off work or something? And, I would love to say also, yeah, you should get off work too. Rest like in bed, not like put your foot up at work. But also the economic realities of the world don't make that as possible as it should be, much like how I should be able to just tell you to go to the doctor. Like, in theory, this should be a very short video. What happens in America if you injure your ankle while dancing in your living room? The answer should be you go to a doctor. But making that video for an American audience requires me to talk to people as well and provide benefits for people who do not have health insurance, as many of us do not. Or, if they do have health insurance, but it's one of these shit tier plans like I described earlier, and they just can't afford to use it as often as they should. So, it's a complicated topic. And actually, I think doing it in brief, I think that actually worked. So I'm not going to worry about overlaying any graphics or anything like this. I'll just kind of release it like a podcast, because I managed to get both ideas, at least the bones of them, out in under 20 minutes. If you want kind of additional reading or watching time on this, I actually did a long form interview with a young woman that worked in one of these call centers and, made those sometimes annoying calls asking you if you want to get health insurance through the marketplace. And, describing the terrible working conditions inside of those, like, modern-day sweatshops, and just how insufficient that system is. If you want to hear more thoughts on that, then we definitely get into it between the two of us, from her insider perspective, my outsider perspective as a political commentator at the time. That's definitely a good watch. And I'll throw a link to that in the description. Also, I really appreciate anybody who's supporting this channel on Patreon. I know it's been kind of hard for me to put out content lately, and since this got so neatly into one video, I guess I'll have to throw some of those other end-of-the-year ideas into another one. But I really want to thank you for that, and if you would like to, the links are also in the description how you can support the channel as well. if you want to get something for that support of the channel, unfortunately, compared to the list price, I make relatively little, but let me talk to you about some books. Stick around. But to everybody else who doesn't want to hear that pitch, I'll see you in the next video. Thanks for sticking around. And have a better 2023 than you had a 2022, even if you had an amazing 2022. Endeavor to make it that much better this year. If you are still, for whatever reason, watching the video, thank you. You have a lot of faith in me to just watch this thing to the end on faith. I like you. I like you. Good vibes. But I also want to tell you that I'm a writer and that I have recently published my 3rd book in paperback. I just got done fully editing them. It has been a lot of work to do by myself, but if you're a Final Fantasy fan, there is at least some chance that you would like to go on a multi-story romp through a connected digital multiverse, but also kind of classic fantasy and magic experience that kind of rides the line between technology and deep fantasy lore. Expect worlds that have existed for hundreds of years and have deep historical roots. Expect characters both memorable and enchanting, and hopefully you will find these worlds and their histories and how they intersect with each other and how people come together and fight for a better world. If you find that kind of thing inspiring, check them out. I think that probably the best starting place that I would recommend is Athena's Chosen, even though chronologically it kind of exists in the middle of the series. It is the first book of its trilogy, and it was based on a tabletop game that I designed based on a book that I was writing at the time and allowed some friends to play in. So it has really interesting rapport, especially like the chitter chatter is just always very lively and interesting in that one, and it's quite a jaunty tale. So anyways, thank you for tuning in for so long. I know that longer videos like this don't usually do well on YouTube, but I appreciate you. You're a good fish there, Charlie Brown. But what does that even mean? Cut? I'm running out of words here.